I'm Alexandra, 32, and until last Thursday, I thought blood meant loyalty. That changed when my father's hand struck my face at our family dinner, leaving everyone frozen in shock. My crime? Refusing to sign over my Manhattan penthouse to my unemployed sister. What my family didn't know was that I'd been recording everything, our conversations, their threats, the slap. They thought I'd cave like always. They were wrong. What followed would tear our family apart, but also reveal the decades of lies that had been holding it together. Hey, everyone. Before I dive deeper into how my family imploded, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this family drama already has you shocked, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories where karma comes full circle. Trust me, you won't believe how this family revenge saga ends. Growing up in the Miller family, I always knew my place. I was Alexandra, the responsible one, the planner, the safety net. My sister, Vanessa, 3 years younger, was the dreamer, the risk-taker, the one whose failures were always cushioned by our parents' unconditional support. Our family dynamic wasn't unusual at first glance. Upper-middle-class suburban life outside Boston, Dad a successful investment banker, Mom running her interior design business, and 2 daughters who couldn't be more different if they tried. From an early age, the contrast between Vanessa and me was stark. While I saved my allowance, studied diligently, and planned meticulously for my future, Vanessa spent frivolously, changed majors 3 times in college, and lived as if consequences were merely suggestions that applied to other people. Our parents reinforced this dynamic in subtle ways that only became obvious to me much later. Alexandra can handle it, they'd say whenever something needed responsibility. Vanessa's just finding herself, they'd explain when she'd abandon yet another career path or relationship. This pattern continued well into our adulthood, creating an unspoken expectation I would succeed regardless of support, while Vanessa needed the family to rally around her perpetual crises. After graduating with honors in finance, I moved to New York City with nothing but 2 suitcases and unshakable determination. Those first years were brutal, sharing a tiny apartment with 3 roommates, working 80-hour weeks at an investment firm, and saving every penny possible. My parents called regularly, but their conversations always circled back to Vanessa's latest drama or need for financial help. Their visits to the city inevitably involved shopping trips for her or discussions about her mounting credit card debt. Meanwhile, I climbed the corporate ladder through sheer grit. By 28, I'd made senior portfolio manager, and by 30, I had saved enough for a down payment on my dream home, a stunning penthouse overlooking Central Park. The day I signed those mortgage papers was the proudest moment of my life. I had done it entirely on my own, without a cent from my family. The penthouse became my sanctuary, my reward for years of discipline and hard work. Every piece of furniture, every artwork on the walls represented a milestone in my career. The terrace garden I meticulously cultivated symbolized how I'd grown something beautiful from nothing. This space was more than property. It was physical proof that I could rely on myself when no one else would prioritize my dreams. My relationship with my family remained complicated but stable: Sunday phone calls, holiday gatherings, the occasional weekend visit. I maintained the peace by never questioning the imbalance in how they treated Vanessa and me. After all, I was doing well without their help. Why rock the boat? Then came Vanessa's latest crisis 6 months ago. After her 3rd failed business venture, a luxury pet accessory boutique that hemorrhaged money, and a messy breakup with her fiancé who'd apparently been funding her lifestyle, she moved back home with our parents. At 29, she was once again starting over with nothing to show for years of finding herself. Our parents called me immediately, explaining how devastated Vanessa was, how she needed a fresh start in a new city. New York, specifically, where I lived, where I could help her out. I agreed to let her stay with me temporarily while she looked for a job and apartment. What was supposed to be 2 weeks stretched into a month, then 2, then 3. Vanessa took over my guest room, filled my refrigerator with her specialty foods, and had her friends over when I worked late. She applied for jobs half-heartedly, always finding reasons why each opportunity was beneath her or not aligned with her personal brand. The tension between us grew as boundaries disappeared. She used my designer clothes without asking, neglected to clean up after herself, and constantly reminded me how lucky I was to have such a beautiful home. When I suggested more affordable neighborhoods for her apartment hunt, she'd look around my penthouse and say things like, "But I could never downgrade to those areas after living here." Throughout this arrangement, our parents called regularly, not to check how I was handling an additional person in my space, but to ensure I was being supportive enough of Vanessa's journey. They suggested I introduce her to my colleagues for job opportunities, lend her my car for interviews, and even co-sign on an apartment lease when she found one. The final straw came during one of these calls when my mother casually mentioned that Vanessa had been looking at apartments in my building. "Wouldn't it be wonderful if you were neighbors?" she mused, as if this were a reasonable expectation. Of course, those units are so expensive. If only there was a way. That night, I overheard Vanessa on the phone with our parents, discussing how I didn't really need all this space and how it would make more sense for someone like her who actually enjoys entertaining to have such a prestigious address. My blood ran cold as I realized they were plotting something beyond just temporary assistance. The next morning, I told Vanessa she needed to find her own place within 2 weeks. The hurt look on her face quickly transformed into indignation as she called our parents to report my selfishness. That evening, my father called, his voice tight with disappointment, suggesting I needed to reconsider my priorities and remember what family means. What they didn't know was that I had already scheduled a meeting with my financial advisor. I was exploring options to help Vanessa with a reasonable down payment on a starter apartment in a nice but affordable neighborhood. I wanted to help her begin building equity and independence, the same way I had. I wasn't willing to simply hand over what I'd worked for, but I was prepared to give her a foundation to build her own success. But as the following week unfolded, it became clear that my family had something very different in mind, something that would reveal just how conditional their love for me had always been, and just how far they would go to maintain the family dynamic that had always placed Vanessa's needs above my own. Little did I know that the family dinner I was dreading that Thursday would change everything, not just my relationship with my family, but my understanding of what loyalty really means and who deserved mine. The family dinner was my mother's idea. "We need to discuss Vanessa's future as a family," she insisted over the phone, her voice carrying that familiar tone, the one that masked demands as requests. I agreed, naively believing we could have a reasonable conversation about sustainable solutions for my sister's situation. My parents arrived at my penthouse Thursday evening, my father carrying an expensive bottle of my favorite wine, a rare gesture that should have been my first warning sign. My mother hugged me tightly, whispering, "Let's make this a positive evening for everyone," while Vanessa fluttered around the kitchen, pretending to help with dinner though she'd done nothing but order catering from my favorite restaurant, using my credit card, of course. We settled around my dining table, the reclaimed wood piece I'd saved for months to purchase, with Manhattan's twinkling skyline as our backdrop. My father poured the wine generously, offered an uncharacteristically warm toast to family unity, and then launched into what clearly had been a rehearsed speech. "Alexandra, you've always been our rock," he began, his voice sliding into the persuasive tone he used with difficult clients. "Your success makes us proud every day. But success isn't just about material wealth. It's about the legacy we create, the support we offer to those we love." My mother nodded encouragingly while Vanessa studied her plate, a practiced vulnerability softening her features. I sipped my wine slowly, already sensing where this conversation was heading. "Vanessa is at a crucial turning point," my father continued. "She needs stability, a foundation from which to rebuild. New York is expensive, as you know, but it's where her network is, where her opportunities lie. I've been thinking about it," I interjected, and I'm prepared to help with a down payment on a nice one-bedroom in Queens or Brooklyn. Something that would give her a start without overwhelming her financially. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged glances while Vanessa's face fell in undisguised disappointment. "That's thoughtful," my mother finally said, but we had something more immediate in mind. She reached for her purse and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table toward me. "We've done some research." Inside was a printed listing for a luxury condo in Tribeca, easily a $3 million property, along with printouts about quitclaim deeds and intra-family property transfers. "We don't understand," my father said, gesturing around my penthouse, "why you would need all this space when Vanessa has nothing. You've always been the independent one. You'd find your feet again quickly." My mind struggled to process what they were suggesting. "You want me to give Vanessa my home? The one I worked 80-hour weeks for years to afford." "Not give," my mother corrected quickly. "Transfer. You could move into something smaller temporarily. Once Vanessa establishes herself properly." "Which could happen any day now," Vanessa interjected eagerly. "I have so many connections reaching out." "Then perhaps you could move back," my mother finished, though we all knew that would never happen. I set my wine glass down carefully, afraid I might shatter it in my grip. "Let me understand this clearly. You want me to sign over my $4.5 million penthouse, which I'm still paying the mortgage on, to Vanessa, who hasn't held a steady job in 5 years, because she needs it more." "Don't be dramatic, Alexandra," my father sighed. "We're talking about helping your sister when she's down. We'd do the same for you." "Would you?" I challenged, years of unspoken resentment suddenly finding voice. "When have you ever sacrificed anything for me? When have you ever prioritized my needs over Vanessa's?" "That's not fair," my mother interjected. "We've always supported both of you." "Really?" I laughed incredulously. "Did you help with my college tuition? Did you contribute to my first apartment's security deposit? Did you ever once offer financial assistance when I was working 3 jobs to make ends meet?" "You didn't need it," my father dismissed. "You were always capable." "And that's my punishment?" "Being capable means I deserve less support, less consideration, less love." "Now you're just being childish," my father's voice hardened. "This isn't about love. It's about family responsibility. Vanessa needs this opportunity. And what about what I need?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. "What about the years of sacrifice it took me to afford this place?" "It's just a property, Alexandra," my mother said soothingly. "Your relationship with your sister is more important than material possessions." "If it's just a property," I countered, "then why does she need mine specifically? Why can't she start with something within her actual means, like every other responsible adult?" "Because she deserves a break," my father suddenly shouted, his facade of reasonableness cracking. "After everything she's been through." "Everything she's put herself through," I corrected. "Every bad decision, every impulsive choice, every responsibility she shirked." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, her reliable defense mechanism whenever accountability approached. "I knew you thought I was a failure," she whispered dramatically. "I don't think you're a failure," I clarified, maintaining my composure. "I think you've been failed by our parents' refusal to let you experience consequences. I'm offering to help you, genuinely help you build something sustainable. But I won't set myself on fire to keep you warm anymore." My father's face darkened. "This isn't a request, Alexandra. We've consulted with our lawyer. If you won't help your sister voluntarily, we're prepared to take other measures." "What measures?" I asked incredulously. "You can't force me to give away my property." "No," he agreed, "but we can ensure you understand the cost of your selfishness. Your mother and I have decided that if you refuse to help Vanessa in this reasonable way, we'll have no choice but to reconsider our own estate planning. Additionally, I've spoken with several colleagues at firms similar to yours. It would be unfortunate if your reputation for family disloyalty became known in financial circles." I stared at him, genuinely shocked by the threat. "You would blackmail your own daughter? Threaten her career because she won't give up her home? Don't be so dramatic, my mother said. We're simply asking you to consider the bigger picture. The picture seems perfectly clear to me, I responded coldly. You're asking me to sacrifice everything I've worked for because you failed to teach Vanessa basic adulting skills. That's when my father stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. Enough. You will sign these papers, he said, jabbing his finger at the folder. You will help your sister as we've outlined, or you will no longer be considered part of this family. I stood as well, meeting his gaze steadily. I won't do it. Not like this. Not under threats. The slap came without warning, his hand connecting with my cheek with enough force to snap my head to the side. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot, followed by a terrible silence. My mother gasped. Vanessa's eyes widened in shock. My father looked momentarily stunned by his own action before his expression hardened again in justification. And in that crystallizing moment of pain and clarity, everything changed. The invisible strings of obligation and manipulation that had bound me to their expectations suddenly snapped. I touched my cheek, feeling the heat of the mark he'd left, and I knew with absolute certainty what I needed to do next. The silence that followed my father's slap stretched for what seemed like eternity. My cheek burned, but something else burned hotter, a clarity I'd never experienced before. In that moment, the fog of family obligation lifted, revealing the manipulation that had defined our relationships for decades. Get out, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. All of you. Now. Alexandra, my mother began, her voice trembling with feigned concern rather than outrage at what my father had done. Your father didn't mean. He meant exactly what he did, I interrupted. And so did you when you brought those transfer papers. So did Vanessa when she went behind my back to plot taking my home. I want all of you out of my house in the next 5 minutes, or I'm calling the police and reporting an assault. My father scoffed, though I noticed he took a step back. Don't be ridiculous. I barely touched you. Without breaking eye contact, I reached for my phone on the sideboard and held it up. The screen showed an active recording, 48 minutes and counting. Their faces registered the implication simultaneously. I had recorded the entire conversation, including the slap. You've been recording us. Vanessa gasped, outrage coloring her voice. That's so invasive. Self-protection isn't invasion, I countered. I started recording our conversations weeks ago when I overheard you plotting to take my home. I wanted evidence of what was happening, though I never imagined it would include physical assault. My father's face paled, then flushed with anger. You delete that right now. Family matters are private. Apparently, family matters also include blackmail, coercion, and violence, I said, stepping toward the door. You have 4 minutes to leave. They gathered their things in stunned silence. My mother tried once more as they reached the door. Alexandra, please. Let's not make permanent decisions in the heat of emotion. This isn't emotional, I replied. It's the most rational decision I've ever made. You've shown me exactly who you are and what I'm worth to you. I believe you. After they left, I sank onto my sofa, hands trembling as the adrenaline began to fade. I touched my cheek again, still feeling the ghost of my father's hand. I'd never imagined he would strike me. He'd always been the reasonable parent, the calculated one who manipulated with words rather than actions. The mask had finally slipped completely. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my penthouse, mentally replaying years of inequity, of swallowed protests, of accepting the role they'd assigned me. By dawn, I had a plan, one that would require courage, strategy, and accepting that the family I thought I had never actually existed. First, I called my office and requested a week of emergency personal leave, something I'd never done in my entire career. My boss, hearing the strain in my voice, approved it immediately and offered support if needed. Next, I contacted a security company to change all my locks and install a comprehensive surveillance system. If my family had been willing to go this far, I couldn't predict what might come next. Then I made perhaps the most difficult call, to Claire Winters, a family law attorney whose reputation for handling high-conflict family cases had made her something of a legend in New York legal circles. Her assistant, hearing the urgency in my voice, scheduled a consultation for that afternoon. Claire's office in Midtown exuded quiet confidence, understated elegance that spoke of success without needing to shout it. The attorney herself matched her surroundings, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to assess and catalog every detail as I recounted the previous night's events. I played the recording for her, watching her expression shift from professional interest to genuine concern as my father's threats became explicit, culminating in the unmistakable sound of the slap. "You were smart to record this," she said when the audio ended. "New York is a one-party consent state, so this is completely admissible if needed." "Needed for what?" I asked. "I don't even know what I'm doing here exactly." "They can't actually take my home, can they?" "No," she confirmed. "Not legally. But this goes beyond property rights, Alexandra. What you've described and what I just heard is a pattern of emotional abuse, culminating in physical assault. The threats to your career constitute blackmail. These are serious matters." "I don't want to press criminal charges," I said immediately, surprising myself with how quickly the response came. Despite everything, the thought of my father in handcuffs still felt wrong. "I just want protection and, I don't know, recognition of what they've done? Consequences that don't involve the criminal justice system." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "There are several approaches we could take. A restraining order would be the immediate step for your physical protection. Beyond that, we could pursue civil remedies for the threats to your career, and I'd strongly recommend working with a forensic accountant." "A forensic accountant?" I repeated, confused. "Based on what you've told me about your family dynamics, I suspect there may be financial irregularities worth investigating. You mentioned your parents' substantial estate that they threatened to cut you from. You also mentioned they never contributed to your education or housing, despite apparent means to do so." I nodded slowly. "It would be worth examining whether family funds that should have been equally distributed were disproportionately allocated to your sister over the years. In some cases, this can constitute a form of financial abuse." The suggestion made my stomach churn, but it also awakened a curiosity I couldn't ignore. Had there been more to their favoritism than emotional preference? Had actual resources been diverted from me to support Vanessa's perpetual needs? "Let's do it," I decided. "The restraining order, the financial investigation, all of it. But I have one condition. I don't want to destroy them. I just want the truth, and I want them to face that truth." Claire studied me for a moment before nodding. "That's actually a healthier approach than most clients take in your position. We'll focus on documentation, protection, and accountability rather than punishment." As I left her office that afternoon, I felt simultaneously lighter and heavier, unburdened by beginning to take action, yet weighed by the knowledge that the path ahead would fundamentally alter my relationship with my family forever. There would be no going back to polite Sunday calls and holiday gatherings once I set these wheels in motion. That evening, as expected, the messages began, first pleading texts from my mother, "We need to talk this through as a family," then increasingly angry demands from my father, "Stop this childish tantrum immediately." And finally guilt-laden missives from Vanessa, "I can't believe you'd tear apart our family over a misunderstanding." I forwarded each message to Claire without responding and then did something I'd never allowed myself before. I turned off my phone completely, poured myself a glass of wine, and stepped out onto my terrace, the home I had earned, the space that was mine alone, and allowed myself to feel everything I'd been suppressing for years, the hurt, the anger, the grief, and beneath it all, a tentative sense of liberation. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight, I would honor the truth of what had happened and what I deserved going forward. The following weeks unfolded like scenes from someone else's life. With the restraining order in place, granted immediately by a judge who viewed my recording with visible disgust, I began working with Claire's recommended forensic accountant, A meticulous woman named Elaine Wong who approached financial investigations with the precision of a surgeon and the tenacity of a detective. Financial abuse leaves paper trails, Elaine explained during our first meeting. Money doesn't just disappear, it transforms. Our job is to follow those transformations. I provided everything I could: tax returns from my college years, fragments of conversations about family investments, vague memories of a trust my grandparents had established for the grandchildren's education. It felt like handing over puzzle pieces without knowing what picture they might form. While Elaine dug through financial histories, Claire pursued another angle, interviewing extended family members willing to speak about patterns they'd observed over the years. My mother's sister, Aunt Helen, whom I'd always sensed had reservations about how I was treated, provided particularly illuminating testimony. Your grandparents left equal educational trusts for both you girls, she confirmed during a video call facilitated by Claire. Each trust contained approximately $250,000 when you turned 18. I was under the impression you'd used yours for Columbia. I stared at the screen in shock. I never knew about any trust. I worked 3 jobs through college and graduated with $87,000 in student loans I just finished paying off last year. Aunt Helen's expression shifted from surprise to grim understanding. Your parents were the trustees until you turned 25. They would have had access, though legally they were supposed to use it only for your education. This revelation was just the first thread that, once pulled, began unraveling the tapestry of financial manipulation that had defined my family dynamics. Over the next 2 weeks, Elaine uncovered a pattern so systematic it couldn't be attributed to oversight or misunderstanding. My educational trust had indeed been drained, not for my education, but redirected through a series of transfers to fund Vanessa's second and third attempts at college, her first failed business venture, and the down payment on a condo she'd briefly owned before selling at a loss. There's more, Elaine said grimly during our third meeting, sliding a folder across the table. Your maternal grandmother left you specifically a collection of antique jewelry in her will. According to the executor's records, your parents took possession of these items on your behalf when you were 22, right when you moved to New York. I vaguely remembered my grandmother's jewelry, pieces she'd sometimes let me try on during childhood visits, promising they would be mine someday. I never received any jewelry, I confirmed. Based on the insurance appraisals included in the estate documents, the collection was worth approximately $175,000, Elaine continued. I've traced sales of similar pieces through auction houses between 2014 and 2016. The timing correlates perfectly with large deposits into Vanessa's business accounts. My hands trembled as I processed this information. The betrayal went deeper than favoritism or emotional manipulation. They had systematically stripped me of my rightful inheritance, resources that could have fundamentally changed the trajectory of my early adult years. Is this criminal? I asked Claire, who had been listening silently. It's definitely breach of fiduciary duty, she confirmed. And potentially fraud, conversion of assets, and elder exploitation regarding your grandmother's intentions. Yes, this could be prosecuted criminally, though it would likely be handled in civil court. What do you recommend? I asked, still struggling to absorb the magnitude of what we'd discovered. That depends entirely on what outcome you want, Claire said carefully. We have enough evidence to file civil suits that would likely result in judgments in your favor, possibly totaling over $500,000 when you account for the misappropriated trust funds, the jewelry, and associated damages. We could also pursue criminal charges, though those cases are harder to prove beyond reasonable doubt. I stared out the window of Claire's office, watching clouds drift across the Manhattan skyline. The Alexandra from a month ago would have immediately rejected the idea of legal action against her parents. That Alexandra had been conditioned to protect family harmony at all costs, even her own well-being. But I wasn't that person anymore. I want 2 things, I said finally. I want recovery of what was taken from me, with interest, and I want them to face what they've done, not just to me, but to Vanessa too. Their help turned her into someone who can't function independently. Neither of us got what we actually needed from them. Claire nodded. Then I suggest we start with a demand letter outlining everything we've discovered, with documentation and proposing a settlement conference. That gives them an opportunity to address this without public court filings, which I suspect they'll want to avoid given your father's professional reputation. The demand letter we drafted was 23 pages long, with over 40 attachments documenting each instance of financial impropriety we'd uncovered. Claire delivered it personally to my parents' home, requiring signed acknowledgement of receipt. Their response came not through their lawyer as we'd expected, but in the form of my mother appearing at my office building the next day, violating the restraining order. Security stopped her in the lobby, and by the time police arrived, she was in tears, insisting she just needed to explain and that I was destroying our family with these ridiculous accusations. The incident strengthened our case while revealing exactly how seriously, or not, my parents took legal boundaries. Claire used the violation to extend the restraining order indefinitely and added a stipulation that all communication must go through legal counsel. 3 days later, we received their official response, a coldly worded letter from an expensive law firm specializing in defending white-collar financial crimes. They denied all allegations, claimed any financial decisions had been made in good faith and with verbal consent, and threatened countersuits for defamation if we pursued the matter. "This is actually good news," Claire said after reviewing their response. "They've hired Barton and With, they're formidable, but they don't waste time on unwinnable cases. The fact that they're throwing around threats rather than addressing the specifics means they know we have them cornered." She was right. Within a week, their tone changed dramatically. Their lawyers requested a meeting to discuss possible resolution without protracted litigation. We agreed to a mediation session with a retired judge serving as neutral facilitator. That day arrived with a surreal quality. Sitting across a conference table from my parents and Vanessa, all of us flanked by attorneys, a stark contrast to our family dinners of just weeks before. My father looked smaller somehow, his confident posture diminished by the weight of exposed secrets. My mother couldn't meet my eyes. Vanessa alternated between tear-filled glances and hostile stares, clearly having been told a version of events that cast me as the villain. The mediator established ground rules before evidence presentation began. For 4 hours, Elaine methodically walked through each financial transaction, each misappropriation, each breach of trust. The documentation was irrefutable. By afternoon, my father's lawyer was whispering urgently in his ear, and my mother had gone through an entire package of tissues. "Before we discuss potential resolution," Claire said when Elaine finished, "my client wants to address her family directly." The mediator nodded approval, and suddenly all eyes were on me. The speech I'd prepared evaporated as I looked at these people who should have been my strongest supporters, but had instead become my betrayers. What emerged instead was raw truth. "I never wanted this," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I spent my entire life seeking your approval, your love, your recognition. I worked myself to exhaustion trying to earn what should have been freely given. And all that time, you were actively undermining me, stealing resources meant for my future, gaslighting me into believing I needed less support because I was the strong one." I turned to Vanessa. "And you, I don't even blame you entirely. They shaped you to be dependent, to feel entitled to whatever I earned. They failed both of us, just in different ways." The room fell completely silent as I continued. "I don't want to destroy you. I don't even want revenge. I want accountability, repayment, and then distance. The chance to build a life free from the manipulation that's defined our family." I could see the impact of my words rippling across their faces: shame, denial, anger, and beneath it all, the dawning recognition that the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The daughter they had seen as endlessly accommodating was gone. In her place sat a woman who had discovered her worth and was not afraid to demand what was rightfully hers. What do you think would happen next? If this family betrayal has shocked you, hit that like button right now. The way this story unfolds is going to leave you speechless, and I promise the karma that's coming will be worth every minute you spend watching. Drop a comment with your predictions about what my parents did next, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single moment of how this family drama explodes. I'll be right back after this short break to continue my story. The settlement conference ended with my parents' attorneys requesting a private consultation with their clients. The mediator granted a 30-minute recess, during which Claire and I stepped out to the building's courtyard for fresh air. "They're going to settle," Claire said confidently as we walked between manicured hedges. "The question is whether they'll acknowledge what they did or simply try to buy their way out without admitting wrongdoing. Which do you think they'll choose?" I asked. Claire gave me a knowing look. "People who've maintained a facade for decades rarely choose transparency voluntarily. But sometimes, when the alternative is public exposure." She was right. When we returned to the conference room, my parents' lead attorney presented their offer: full financial restitution of the misappropriated trust fund and jewelry proceeds, with 6% annual interest compounded from the dates of diversion, totaling approximately $683,000. In exchange, I would sign a confidentiality agreement preventing me from discussing the matter publicly or with extended family members. "My client rejects the confidentiality requirement," Claire responded immediately. "Financial restitution addresses only part of the harm done. The gaslighting, emotional manipulation, and attempt to coerce her out of her home remain unaddressed." My father's face darkened. "This is extortion," he hissed, earning a warning look from his attorney. "Actually," the mediator interjected, "based on the evidence presented, the offer on the table appears to be the minimum legally required restitution for documented financial impropriety. Ms. Miller would be well within her rights to pursue additional damages for emotional distress, especially given the recorded physical assault." A tense negotiation followed, with proposals and counterproposals flying across the table. Finally, after consulting privately with my parents, their attorney presented revised terms: the full financial restitution, a written apology acknowledging the specific actions taken, no confidentiality requirement, and, most surprisingly, an offer to fund therapy for both Vanessa and me with separate therapists specializing in family trauma. "They're throwing Vanessa in as a distraction," Claire whispered, "to appear magnanimous and shift focus from their actions." I considered the offer carefully. The financial restitution was non-negotiable. That was simply returning what had been stolen. The absence of a confidentiality clause meant I preserved my right to speak my truth. The therapy offer felt like a belated acknowledgement that damage had been done to both daughters, albeit in different ways. "I'll accept on one additional condition," I said finally. "I want a family meeting, just the four of us, no lawyers, where we discuss everything that's happened. Complete honesty, no deflections. After that, I'll decide what kind of relationship, if any, I want going forward." My mother looked physically pained by the suggestion, while my father's expression remained carefully neutral. After a whispered conference, their attorney nodded. They agree to the meeting, provided it takes place in a neutral location with a professional mediator present, but not participating unless rules are broken. 2 days later, we gathered in a nondescript conference room at a midtown hotel, a space deliberately chosen for its lack of emotional associations. The mediator explained her role, not to guide our conversation, but simply to ensure basic rules of respect were maintained. No interrupting, no name-calling, no physical intimidation. With those parameters established, she moved to a corner of the room, leaving the four of us facing each other across a small table. The silence stretched uncomfortably until I decided to begin. "I want to understand," I said simply. "Not just the what, but the why. Why did you systematically redirect my inheritance to Vanessa? Why did you let me struggle financially through college while funding her repeated attempts? Why did you sell grandmother's jewelry that was specifically left to me?" My father cleared his throat, his businessman persona firmly in place despite the personal nature of our meeting. Your framing is emotional and biased. We made parental decisions based on assessing each daughter's needs. You were clearly self-sufficient. Self-sufficient doesn't mean I didn't need support, I interrupted. And parental decisions doesn't explain committing what amounts to theft of my inheritance. It wasn't theft, my mother interjected, her voice quavering. We were trying to balance things. You were always so capable, so focused. Vanessa needed more help. So you stole from me to give to her? I pressed. How is that balancing? You don't understand what it's like, my father said, frustration evident in his tone. Having one child who excels at everything and another who struggles constantly. We were trying to level the playing field. By tilting it entirely in her direction, I observed. Did it ever occur to you that Vanessa struggles precisely because you never allowed her to face consequences? That your help actually crippled her ability to function independently? Vanessa, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. Don't talk about me like I'm not here. You think you know everything, Alexandra. You always have. Little Miss Perfect with her fancy job and her penthouse, looking down on everyone else. I've never looked down on you, Vanessa. I've been frustrated by your choices, yes. Hurt by your willingness to take what's mine, absolutely. But I've always wanted you to succeed on your own terms, not as a perpetual dependent. That's easy for you to say, she shot back. Everything comes easily to you. Nothing has come easily to me, I said quietly. I worked 3 jobs during college. I lived with 4 roommates in a tiny apartment for years. I put in 80-hour weeks to advance my career. The difference is that I did it without the safety net that you've always had. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. We never meant to hurt you, Alexandra. We really believed we were doing what was best for the family as a whole. By lying to me? By stealing from me? By physically assaulting me when I refused to give up my home? The questions hung in the air, unanswerable. My father's composure finally cracked. What do you want me to say? That we made mistakes? Fine. We made mistakes. We favored Vanessa. We took resources that should have been yours. We crossed lines we shouldn't have crossed. Is that what you need to hear? I need to hear the truth, I replied steadily. Not because it will fix anything, but because without acknowledgement of what actually happened, there's no path forward, not even a separate piece. What followed was 3 hours of painful, raw conversation, my parents gradually abandoning their defensive postures as the weight of evidence and my unwavering calm made denial futile. My mother eventually admitted that their actions stemmed partly from their own insecurities. Vanessa's struggles reflected on their parenting in ways my success didn't. My father confessed that he'd always found it easier to connect with Vanessa's personality, while my independence had sometimes felt like rejection of his role. Vanessa oscillated between defensive anger and tearful apologies, ultimately acknowledging that she had been complicit in our parents' favoritism by exploiting it knowingly. I knew about your trust fund, she admitted finally. Mom told me they were using it for my business because you didn't need it. I didn't question it because it was easier not to. As the mediated meeting reached its conclusion, no miraculous healing had occurred. There was no group hug, no promises of instant reconciliation. Instead, there was something more valuable, truth acknowledged, however painfully, and the first tentative steps toward authentic relating rather than role-playing our assigned family parts. I need time, I told them as we prepared to leave. The financial restitution will be completed according to the settlement terms, but rebuilding trust, if that's even possible, will take much longer. My father nodded stiffly. My mother reached for my hand but respected my subtle withdrawal. Vanessa looked lost, the familiar script of family dynamics no longer available to follow. As we parted ways outside the hotel, I felt neither triumph nor closure, just the quiet certainty that I had finally stood in my truth and the exhausted relief of setting down a burden I'd carried for far too long. The months following our mediated family meeting brought changes I couldn't have anticipated. The financial restitution was completed promptly. My parents liquidating investments to transfer the full amount within 30 days. I used part of it to establish my own foundation supporting first-generation college students with emergency funds, housing assistance, and mentorship, resources that would have changed my own early adult experience dramatically. But the more profound shifts were internal. Working with Dr. Lindsay, a therapist specializing in family trauma, I began excavating layers of conditioning I hadn't even recognized. How I'd internalized the message that my worth was tied to achievement and self-sufficiency. How I'd accepted emotional neglect as the price of being the strong one. How I'd built my entire identity around never needing help, a defense mechanism against the pain of knowing it wouldn't be forthcoming if I did. The most insidious aspect of family dysfunction, Dr. Lindsay explained during one particularly illuminating session, is how it becomes normalized. The roles assigned in childhood, golden child, scapegoat, invisible child, caretaker, become so deeply embedded in our understanding of ourselves that we continue playing them long after leaving home. This insight sparked a period of profound personal reassessment. I began examining my friendships, my romantic relationships, my career choices through this new lens. How many times had I attracted partners who needed saving, just as Vanessa had? How often had I taken on additional work responsibilities without recognition or compensation because I was reliable Alexandra, who never complained? How frequently had I swallowed my own needs to maintain peace with others? The answers were uncomfortable but liberating. I initiated difficult conversations with friends who had become accustomed to one-sided emotional support. I established clearer boundaries at work, which paradoxically led to greater respect and more meaningful projects. I started dating differently, becoming attuned to early signs of emotional unavailability or expectation of caretaking that I would have previously ignored. Alongside my personal evolution, the family dynamic was undergoing its own transformation, albeit more slowly and with considerable resistance. My parents, perhaps motivated initially by legal consequences rather than genuine insight, nevertheless began their own therapeutic journeys. My father, after initial skepticism, found himself confronting patterns inherited from his own emotionally distant father. My mother gradually acknowledged how her enabling behavior had undermined both her daughters in different ways. Vanessa's path proved the most volatile. Our parents' diminished support, not withdrawn entirely but recalibrated to encourage independence rather than dependence, triggered initially hostile responses. She called me repeatedly, alternating between angry accusations that I had destroyed the family and tearful pleas to intercede on her behalf. I maintained compassionate distance, neither cutting contact completely nor rushing to rescue her from the necessary discomfort of growth. When she called raging, I would calmly state, "I understand you're upset. When you're ready to talk without attacking me, I'm here." When she called in tears, I would listen empathetically, but resist offering solutions or financial assistance. 3 months after our mediated meeting, Vanessa reached a breaking point. After another rejected request for just a small loan from our parents, she left a voicemail that still resonates with me. "I hate all of you for changing the rules. But maybe I hate myself more for never learning how to play by the normal ones." The raw honesty of that message marked a turning point. The next day, she called again, calmer, more reflective. "I need help," she said simply. "Not money. Not a place to stay. But help figuring out who I am when I'm not being taken care of." That conversation led to Vanessa finding her own therapist, not the one our parents had offered to fund, but a specialist in adult children of emotionally immature parents whom she researched herself. She moved to Philadelphia, where living costs were more manageable than New York, and took an entry-level position at a marketing firm, work below her self-perceived station, but aligned with her actual experience level. Our relationship entered a fragile rebuilding phase. We spoke weekly by phone, our conversations gradually evolving from guarded updates to more authentic exchanges. 6 months after her move, she invited me to visit her apartment, a modest but cheerful one-bedroom she had furnished and decorated herself. "It's the first place that's truly mine," she said as she gave me the tour. "Not funded by mom and dad, not temporarily occupying someone else's space. Just mine." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, the healthy pride of earned accomplishment rather than entitlement. As we shared a simple dinner she had cooked herself, another new skill, she confessed, "I used to be so jealous of you. Everything you had seemed to come at my expense. Your independence meant my dependence. Your strength meant my weakness." I couldn't see that we were both playing roles assigned to us, not choosing our own paths. We were set up to be rivals rather than allies, I agreed. The terrible irony is that we both lost in different ways. My relationship with our parents evolved more slowly. We established a monthly family video call, a controlled environment for rebuilding communication without the pressure of in-person meetings. These calls were initially awkward, filled with surface updates and careful avoidance of sensitive topics. Gradually, with consistent boundaries and the support of our respective therapists, more authentic interaction became possible. My father, whose physical assault had crystallized my decision to break the cycle, struggled most visibly with our new dynamic. Accustomed to wielding authority rather than earning respect, he alternated between stiff formality and clumsy attempts at connection. During one video call, he unexpectedly addressed the slap directly, the first time he'd mentioned it since our mediated meeting. "I think about it every day," he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "That moment when I struck you. I've spent my life believing I was nothing like my own father, who used his hands regularly." One moment of lost control revealed how close to the surface that legacy still lives. I'm working to ensure it never happens again, with anyone. The acknowledgement wasn't a magical healing moment, but it was a significant step toward the accountability I had sought. My mother, too, began making halting progress, learning to express her own needs directly rather than through manipulation, recognizing how her enabling had harmed both her daughters and her marriage. Throughout this period of family transformation, my professional life flourished in unexpected ways. The boundaries I'd established created space for innovation and leadership that had previously been consumed by taking on others' responsibilities. I received a substantial promotion, becoming the youngest director in my firm's history. More significantly, I began mentoring younger women in finance, particularly those from backgrounds without financial privilege or family support. Sharing my journey selectively with these protégés created connections more authentic than I'd previously thought possible in professional contexts. My experiences, rather than remaining shameful secrets, became valuable perspective that could help others navigate similar challenges. As the one-year anniversary of my father's slap approached, that catalyzing moment that had set all these changes in motion, I found myself reflecting on the nature of family bonds, accountability, and the possibility of redemption. No fairy tale ending had emerged. No perfect reconciliation had erased the decades of dysfunction. Instead, something more nuanced and ultimately more valuable had developed, a family slowly learning to relate authentically rather than performing assigned roles, individuals taking responsibility for their own healing while respecting others' boundaries. The journey continued, with setbacks and progress in unpredictable measures. But the fundamental power dynamic had shifted permanently. I was no longer the family shock absorber, expected to accommodate everyone else's needs while suppressing my own. I was Alexandra, complete in myself, clear in my boundaries, open to connection, but no longer desperate for approval. The penthouse that had become the focal point of our family's power struggle remained mine, not as a symbol of victory over my sister, but as a testament to my own journey from accommodation to authenticity. The space that my family had tried to take from me had become the foundation from which I was building a life truly my own. Is this story resonating with you? I'd love to know where you're watching from. This journey through family betrayal and finding my own strength has been transformative. If you're enjoying this story of discovering hard truths and finding justice, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories. We're about to get to the most shocking part, the final confrontation and the ultimate karma moment that changed everything. 2 years after that fateful family dinner when my father's hand struck my face, I stood in my penthouse preparing for another family gathering, this one entirely different in nature and purpose. The table was set for four. The Manhattan skyline provided the same backdrop, but everything else had transformed. This dinner wasn't an ambush or manipulation, but a milestone acknowledgement. After 24 months of individual therapy, cautious rebuilding of relationships, and continuous boundary reinforcement, we had reached a place where sharing a meal in my home felt possible, even meaningful. As I arranged flowers in the centerpiece, I reflected on the journey. The financial restitution had been completed long ago, but the emotional accounting had been more complex and nuanced. Some debts could never be fully repaid, some wounds would always leave scars. Yet within those limitations, genuine healing had occurred. Vanessa arrived first, no longer living with our parents, but thriving in her own Philadelphia apartment. She had recently been promoted to account manager at her firm, an achievement earned through consistent work rather than charm or family connections. The changes in her went beyond professional success. She carried herself differently, more grounded, less performative. Our relationship had evolved into something resembling actual sisterhood rather than the rivalry our parents had fostered. "I brought dessert," she said, holding up a bakery box. "Made by professionals, not me. I know my limitations." We laughed, the kind of easy laughter that had been absent from our interactions for decades. As we arranged the cheesecake in the refrigerator, she touched my arm lightly. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" she asked. "If they hadn't played us against each other all those years? If they'd just loved us both for who we were?" Sometimes I admitted. But I try not to get lost in alternate timelines. We're here now, building something healthier. That's what matters. Our parents arrived precisely on time, another change from the past when they would deliberately arrive early to help my mother, or late to assert control, my father. They brought wine but didn't presume to take over the hosting role. We navigated the initial greetings with the careful awareness of people who know both the potential for connection and the capacity for harm that family relationships contain. Dinner progressed with conversation that moved gradually from safe topics toward more meaningful exchange. No theatrical accusations or defensive posturing emerged. Instead, there was the steady presence of four adults choosing to see each other more clearly and relate more honestly than before. Over dessert, my father raised his glass in an unexpected toast. "To Alexandra," he said, his voice steady but humble, "who had the courage to break patterns the rest of us might have continued indefinitely. Your strength, real strength, not the role we assigned you, changed all of us for the better." The acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Not because I needed his approval anymore, but because it represented how far we had all traveled from the dynamics that had defined us for so long. Later that evening, after they had gone, I stood on my terrace looking out at the city lights. The penthouse that had become the catalyst for our family's reckoning had also been the space where I'd rebuilt myself, where I'd learned that boundaries aren't walls, but healthy definitions of where others end and I begin. The most profound lesson of these 2 years hadn't been about family dynamics or even healing from past wounds. It had been about authorship, the recognition that while we can't control the narratives we're born into, we can choose whether to continue them or write new ones for ourselves. My family story hadn't ended with perfect reconciliation or complete redemption. Instead, it had evolved into something more realistic and ultimately more valuable, a case study in accountability, boundaries, and the possibility of growth, even after decades of dysfunction. The parents who had once sought to control my life through manipulation now approached me with respectful caution. The sister who had been positioned as my rival had become an ally in healing our shared family wounds. As for me, the responsible one, the accommodator, the family shock absorber, I had discovered that true strength isn't endless accommodation, but the courage to stand in one's truth, even when that stance disrupts comfortable patterns. The Alexandra who had once swallowed hurt to keep peace had been replaced by a woman who understood that real love doesn't require the sacrifice of selfhood. The penthouse remained mine, not as a symbol of victory in a family power struggle, but as a testament to the life I had built through my own efforts. More importantly, I had reclaimed ownership of my story, not as the dutiful daughter or the responsible sister, but as Alexandra, complete in herself. That ownership extended beyond my personal life. The foundation I had established with my restitution funds had grown, supporting dozens of first-generation college students with resources and mentorship. My career had flourished not despite, but because of the boundaries I'd established. The relationships I cultivated, both romantic and platonic, were characterized by mutual respect rather than caretaking or codependence. The family we were building slowly, imperfectly, but intentionally bore little resemblance to the one that had gathered in this same space 2 years earlier. The dynamics that had seemed immutable had proven changeable. The patterns that had felt inescapable had been interrupted and rewritten. Not through dramatic gestures or perfect resolution, but through the consistent, unglamorous work of showing up differently. Of choosing truth over harmony, authenticity over roles, accountability over justification. We were writing a new family story together, one in which each member could be fully human rather than merely functional. As I closed the terrace doors and moved through my home, the home I had earned, the home I had defended, the home that had witnessed both the breakdown and rebuilding of my family, I felt neither triumph nor resentment. Instead, I felt the quiet certainty that comes from standing firmly in one's own life, neither defined by family wounds nor limited by family expectations. The journey hadn't ended. It never really would. But the path forward was marked by choice rather than obligation, by authenticity rather than performance, by love that strengthened rather than diminished the self. And that, perhaps, was the most meaningful justice of all. Wow. What a journey we've been on together. I want to sincerely thank you for staying with me through this entire story. Has anything similar ever happened in your family? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Family dynamics can be so complicated and sometimes the hardest, but most necessary thing is standing up for yourself when those who should protect you try to take advantage instead. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about family relationships, personal growth, and finding your own strength. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to set boundaries, even with family. Until next time, remember that true family supports your growth rather than limiting it. Thanks for watching.